Good day to all of you from the Brocon News Center here in Los Angeles. Welcome, everyone, to Alex Witt Reports. Here's what's happening for you at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific time. We have breaking news on the release of police body cam video related to the death of Ronald Green, a black man arrested by troopers in Louisiana. And we're going to warn you once again, the video and the graphic, quite disturbing. Priscilla Thompson joining me once again from Monroe, Louisiana, with the very latest. And Priscilla, I know you must have had an agonizing exchange with Green's mother just a short time ago. What is she telling you?
Well, Alex, she told me that on one hand, she is excited that the public is finally able to see what happened to her son on that day in its entirety. But on the other hand, she is, of course, hurting. And this is very painful to her to have to relive his death, as she described it to me. She told me that she has not watched the entirety of this new release of video because it is too painful for her to see how those troopers spoke to her son, and also to hear his screams in those final moments of his life. And of course, all of this is coming out after the Associated Press began releasing that video, which prompted the Louisiana State Police to release all of it in its entirety. And I asked her about that timeline and the time that it has taken for all of this to come out. Take a listen to what she had to say.
2 years later, just what I did see again on the videos, what my son went through, how he was murdered. Last year, I wanted to see my son. I had to be there when he took his last breath. I had to see it. But seeing this video and reliving even more of how these troopers take joy in how they actually kill my son, I'm so mad. I am so mad. It's like they picked on the right mother here. Let it be known, you know, if it takes to my dying day. I hope I live to see it. All these guys need to be held accountable. They need to pay the penalty for murder. There's no other way you can look at this.
Now, this is the first piece of evidence that the state police have released since this investigation began 2 years ago. I spoke with the family attorney as well, and he tells me that he would like to see indictments come down in the next couple of months, particularly for the officer who told Green to remain on his stomach even as he tried to turn over and prop himself up during a time when some folks suspect that he may have been struggling to breathe. But the other thing that we have managed to get our hands on at NBC is a copy of that official autopsy report. And what we are learning from that is that Green did have high levels of cocaine and alcohol in his system. We're also learning that he had a broken breastbone, a torn aorta, and also a head injury, although we don't know if that was a result of the car crash and the chase that had ensued, or if that was a result of his interactions with police. The medical examiner not listing a manner of death, whether to call that homicide or accidental or undetermined. But we do know that they labeled the manner of death, saying that it was caused by cocaine-induced agitated delirium, complicated by motor vehicle collision, physical struggle, inflicted head injury, and restraint. Now, the state investigation and that federal civil rights investigation that was open late last year are both still ongoing, and so no really clear timeline on when this investigation is going to wrap up and when this family or this community can expect more answers in this case. Alex?
Okay, Priscilla Thompson, thank you so much for that update from Monroe. Joining me right now, California Congressman Ro Khanna, a Democratic member of the House Armed Services, Agriculture, and Oversight Committees. Congressman, I'm glad to see you. On the heels of Priscilla's report there and your familiarity with this story about Mr. Green, the tragedy that happened 2 years ago this month, where does police reform stand in Congress? Any kind of legislation being passed or agreed upon to get to the president's desk?
Well, Alex, first of all, it is just heartbreaking to see a man literally pleading for his life, asking for grace, asking for mercy, and then just being killed, and killed in a way with just contempt and no regard for life. I think this is just, again, shocking the nation. The House, as you know, has passed the Police Injustice Act that Karen Bass led. She has worked with senators on it. She worked with Republicans on it. All it says is that force should be an absolute last resort, that officers shouldn't be allowed to take action like this. There's some very common sense reforms. It's time for the Senate to take it up and pass it.
So you say that it's very common sense. What are the expectations? I mean, do you hear rumblings about its interpretation in the Senate and if they can get behind this simple common sense reform, like no excessive force, folks?
Exactly. And some of the officers themselves want this. They don't want escalations. I mean, you think about the tragedy here. You had an unarmed black man who ran a traffic light and ends up dead. I mean, everyone in this country should say that's not the outcome that we want. We want to have de-escalation. We don't want police using chokeholds on individuals. We need to have accountability of police officers who act in this way so that there is reform, and force should be a last resort. These are common sense principles. The challenges, as you know, the filibuster and the Republicans in the Senate have just not been willing to move.
So when you know Republicans are getting a look at video like this, I mean, what is their reaction to it? The Republicans in the Senate, you would think, would say, yeah, this is awful, and have the same just human gut reaction that you have and I have looking at it.
Absolutely. And so many law enforcement officials, people in my district, have the same reaction.
Of course.
Because there are a lot of law enforcement who do honorable work, who do good work, who would never, ever come close to doing something like this. And they see this taking place, and it's something that they're ashamed of. And what they're saying is, let's have the reforms that are necessary. And what we're talking about are common sense reforms, but the Republicans have politicized it as being sort of your anti-law enforcement. If you're for these reforms, no, you're actually for law enforcement. You're for 95% of the law enforcement officials who want to see honorable work under ethical standards.
Understandably so. Congressman, please stay with us for just a couple of minutes. We're going to go to Capitol Hill for a report, Middle East as well for an update, and then I'll come right back to you after that because I'd like to discuss with you the Israel-Palestinian conflict and the potential January 6th commission. So stay there, sir. And on the heels of that, let's go to Washington, where President Biden is facing Republican resistance on three major legislative fronts, all coming to a head this week as the president's hopes for bipartisanship appear to be dimming. First, on infrastructure, Republicans throwing cold water on the White House's counter proposal to Biden's $2.2 trillion infrastructure plan, arguing that the cost is still too high, even after the administration lowered the price now to $1.7 trillion. Started as a bipartisan bill, is getting zero Republican support in the Senate, even after 35 House Republicans broke ranks to support it. Senator Tim Kaine telling me this resistance might push Democrats to move forward with the investigation without GOP support.
Try to use the filibuster to block an analysis of why the Capitol was attacked in January 2021 for only the first time since the War of 1812. I think that will send a powerful message. If they're successful in filibustering this commission, I think it will probably convince a lot of Democrats that if we're going to do what the American public needs, we may have to go it alone.
NBC's Leanne Caldwell is on Capitol Hill once again with the very latest on this. What is your sense, Leanne, as I welcome you, to what is going to happen with next week's vote on the commission?
Well, Alex, it's clear that all Democrats are supporting this January 6th commission as it stands. Let's also look a little bit at the details of it. It is very similar to the setup of the 9/11 commission nearly 20 years ago. So when Republicans say that this is a partisan ploy by Speaker Pelosi, there's too many similarities to how the 9/11 commission was set up to really for there to be any factual basis behind that. Now, it's unlikely that many Republicans or any Republicans are going to support it. As you mentioned in your top, there are zero who currently do. There's a couple like Senator Susan Collins and Mitt Romney who say perhaps with some changes they could get on board. There's less than a dozen of others who say they are undecided and considering, but it is not looking good. And this is raising some questions about the role of the filibuster. Of course, that 60-vote threshold to pass so much legislation in in the Senate, and if the filibuster needs to be in place, especially with something like an investigation into January 6th. Let's listen to Representative Joe Neguse of Colorado. He was, of course, an impeachment manager in the last impeachment of the former president, and what he said about this commission and the tie-up in the Senate.
I can think of no better signal that the United States Senate is fundamentally broken as an institution if their first filibuster is over a bipartisan commission into the events of that would investigate the events of January 6th. And if that is the case, then I think that ultimately the Senate Democratic Caucus is going to have to step forward and end the filibuster, eliminate the filibuster once and for all, so that we can finally deliver for the American people.
So the question, though, on the filibuster, though, Alex, is if there's 50 Democrats to get rid of it. And before this, there was not. Senator Joe Manchin and others didn't want to do it. We'll see if this is reason enough to put them over that edge in order to get rid of it. Alex.
Okay, we'll see. Leanne Caldwell, thank you so much. Also, breaking news to share from London, everyone, where thousands are gathering in support of the people of Palestine after more than a week of unrest in the Middle East. Let's go to NBC's Erin McLaughlin. She's all the way in Tel Aviv for us. Erin, another welcome to you. So there were some tensions again today in East Jerusalem. What are you hearing?
Yeah, we're hearing from an NBC producer who was there that there was a confrontation between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Now, Sheikh Jarrah is a flashpoint in this conflict. It has been in the days leading up to the violence over Gaza. Mainly around the potential eviction of several Palestinian families from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. Now, NBC producer tells us that for many days now, some of the roads in the neighborhood have been blocked. Today, around 5 p.m., dozens of Palestinian protesters arrived at the roadblocks, and there was a confrontation between Israeli police and the protesters, with Israeli police dispersing the crowds using stink water and stun grenades. Now, the Israeli police say that the protesters threw plastic bottles and that they were working to restore order, but it just sort of illustrates that the underlying issues here have not been addressed by this ongoing ceasefire and persist, and that is a fact not lost on Israelis who live in Ashkelon, which is just miles from the Gaza border, and they were telling me that they're bracing for the potential of more violence in the future. Take a listen. Are you optimistic about the ceasefire?
Look, I'm optimistic. People ask me. I have no idea if it will last an hour or two, a day or two, a week or two, a year or two. But we all know that it will come back one day. And every time when it comes back with more intensity.
Now, the U.S. Secretary of State is expected in the region next week. He's expected, of course, to discuss the ceasefire as well as what's happening in East Jerusalem. The president has explicitly expressed his concern about the situation and tensions there as well. Alex?
Okay. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin, thank you so much from Tel Aviv for that report. Let's bring back in Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman, thank you for staying with us. So Representative Ilhan Omar tweeted, "We should all be grateful that a ceasefire will prevent more civilians and children from being killed. But now what? We need accountability for every war crime committed, and we need to stop underwriting crimes against humanity while doing nothing to end the occupation." Do you agree with that? Where should we go from here?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it that way. I mean, I agree that we needed a ceasefire to stop the violence. Now I think what we need is to return to diplomacy, to have a two-state solution, to end the blockade in Gaza, but to also recognize that there shouldn't be Hamas rockets coming against Israel. I mean, this is a complicated process, and we need our Secretary of State engaged there. What I will say, and I've said clearly, is that any of our aid needs to be consistent with the Leahy Law and the Arms Export Control Act, and it should not be used in any way that violates human rights.
Okay. To that point, Senator Bernie Sanders, as you know, has introduced a resolution of disapproval on a $735 million U.S. arms sale to Israel. Your Democratic colleagues, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Mark Pocan, Rashida Tlaib, they introduced a similar resolution in the House. Where do you stand on this effort to block the Israel arms sale?
Well, I'm where Senator Kaine and Senator Chris Murphy is that first we need to be briefed on it. I would not have approved any sale during the violence, but my understanding is this is a year from now, so we need to know what is this about. Are we going to make sure that anything is consistent with the Leahy and Arms Export Act? But I really think we have to first take a step back and try to understand what is going to advance the interests of peace, and that is first having Secretary Blinken actively involved or an envoy actively involved in trying to get back to a two-state solution, recognizing that Israel is an ally, but that we need to make sure all of our aid is consistent with the Leahy Law and the Arms Export Control Act, and there aren't human rights violations, and also making sure that their security is considered.
Yeah. Okay, let's turn back to the Capitol riot. The prospects for the January 6th Independent Commission getting 60 votes to pass in the Senate appear bleak as of now, certainly. If the commission bill fails, what happens next? Do you want to see Democrats form a select committee or amend the commission bill to gain Republican support somehow? You think that's even tenable?
Alex, I think this point is worth making. The Speaker has bent over backwards to try to get Republicans. There have been so many people like me in the caucus putting pressure on her saying, let's just do this. We can't wait. And she has tried time and again to make this bipartisan because she loves this institution. She loves the Capitol. She's not looking in any way to score political points. And you know what no one understands is what is the objection? What is, I mean, I keep hearing we don't have the votes, McConnell saying this. I never heard a substantive argument. Why wouldn't you want a commission to look into the attacks on the Capitol, an attack on our democracy?
Okay, I'm going to offer this up. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's among the House Republicans who voted against the commission. Let's all take a listen to what she said earlier this week. She's claiming that it's the Capitol rioters who are being treated unfairly. Yeah, here's that.
While it's catch and release for domestic terrorists, Antifa, BLM, the people who breached the Capitol on January 6th are being abused, some even being held for 23 hours a day in solitary confinement.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tells the public radio show Latino USA that many people refuse to admit how the attack is, quote, deeply deeply affected lawmaking and policymaking. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean, she's part of that group of Republicans who've certainly been defiant, not just about the Capitol riot, but other things, and that would include, of course, the pandemic. Several Republican lawmakers gleefully defying mask rules on the House floor this week. Put this all together. How does behavior denying facts, denying truth, impact the legislative process?
Well, it's made it almost dysfunctional to work with some of those members. Here is the ultimate irony. The Republican Party claims that they're the law enforcement party, that they're the party that is pro-police. The people who died because of those attacks were police officers. I don't understand how you can claim to be pro-police or pro-law enforcement and not want a commission to investigate people who killed the police officer, who led to the death of the police officer. How are you in any way justifying that violence? It is beyond the pale. I used to think there used to be one line in American democracy that we believe we solve disputes based on the rule of law, based on a civility and decorum. And that used to be conservative thinking. And they've totally thrown that out of the water. Some of these people, Edmund Burke and conservatism wouldn't recognize them. They would be embarrassed by them. And it's a real crisis. We don't have a conservative party right now in this country. The Republican Party is not a conservative party. You can call it whatever else, but it's not conservative.
Yeah, we keep hearing that over and over again from multiple sources. I thank you as well for your contribution on this, Congressman Rokan. It's always good to see you, my friend. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Republicans and the pushback against a January 6th commission, as we were talking about. Is there any logical reason for them to oppose finding out why their lives were in danger? My next guest actually might have an answer to that. New pressure mounting on the former president as the New York Attorney General elevates her inquiry into the Trump Organization, making it a criminal probe, including possible jail time. Let's go to my colleague, Corey Coffin, who's outside Trump Tower in Manhattan. She's covering the intensifying probes. So, Corey, another welcome to you. What is the reaction to these new developments?
Yeah, more people within the Trump Organization, or at least formerly closely within the Trump Organization, Alex, are weighing in their intimate knowledge and saying exactly what they believe Weisselberg had knowledge of when it comes to the finances of the Trump Organization. Because as we know, in addition to the elevated criminal probe of the Trump Organization, Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg is facing his own criminal investigation into his personal taxes. Many legal analysts believe that this could be a tactic by investigators to try to pressure Weisselberg to flip on his boss and provide any information that they might need from the Trump Organization. Now, former Trump executive Barbara Russ was on MSNBC earlier today. She describes exactly how she believes Weisselberg is key to that investigation. Listen here.
It's so like him to blame somebody else. He must blame someone else, but he will say, no, Eric did that, or Ivanka did that, or Weisselberg did that. You know, he won't accept any possibility of responsibility. And that's where, you know, the problem lies, penning it to him, forcing it, putting it on him. And Weisselberg could be, you know, he could be the key to all of that if he flips.
All right, so for his part, Trump has reacted to this elevated probe. He has said, quote, there is nothing more corrupt than an investigation that is in desperate search of a crime. The Attorney General of New York literally campaigned on prosecuting Donald Trump before she even knew anything about me. Of course, Trump is referring to New York State Attorney General Letitia James, whose investigation into Trump's charitable organization led to its disillusionment in 2018, Alex. And in addition to this criminal probe here in New York, we know of 3 other investigations that Trump is at the center of, including 29 lawsuits against him. Now, he has not been charged with a crime specifically, but he has raised $31 million in his post-presidential political action committee, which NBC News has learned the former president can use part of for any legal defense he might need. Alex?
That is extraordinary, that update. Thank you so much, Corey Coffin. Joining me now, Olivia Troy, director of the Republican Accountability Project and former top aide to Vice President Mike Pence. With a welcome to you, Olivia, it's good to see you. So I wanted to start by getting your reaction to this development. You used to work in the White House. How do you suppose this news is going down in Trump world?
Well, they're probably worried because anybody who's ever worked around the Trump enterprise and Trump himself knows that Trump only cares about himself. And, you know, I have no doubt that along the way, people are going to flip on him because they know that when it comes down to it, it's really about him. Whether he has to throw his children under the bus or anybody around him, this man will do that.
That is absolutely extraordinary, considering the way he surrounded himself with his family throughout his presidency. To think that he, as a father, a patriarch, would do that, but we will see. The Senate, as you know, is expected to vote on this bipartisan January 6th commission as soon as next week, but there's a growing number of Republicans who are against the bill. Is there any logical reason for Republicans to oppose finding out why their lives were in danger while they were at work that day?
No. Absolutely not. They should be wanting to get to the bottom of this because really it's about lessons learned and really figuring out what happened that day, what led to that day, why things did not proceed the way they should have, why the response was so slow, and getting to the facts, really. And really, I think it's about covering for the dereliction of duty of Donald Trump, who was in office that day, who watched the whole thing go down and did nothing to stop it. And I think it's just setting a bad precedent for them. But I think this will come back to haunt them in future elections because we'll be here to remind them about the fact that, you know, they may be obstructing this because they don't want the truth to come out. And not only are they failing democracy, but they're telling their own supporters and voters along the way that we're willing to cover up whatever it is, including a domestic terrorist attack on our country or a massive future attack on our country. We are willing to cover it up because we want to stay in power.
So here's a stunner. This is about Congressman Greg Pence of Indiana, your former boss, Mike Pence's own brother, who voted against the commission. Even after the riot,
it was pretty astonishing to watch him vote that way, but I'm not surprised. I think the Pences have decided that Trumpism is their base as well, and at whatever cost to whatever their loyalty is to each other, including the fact that your brother's life was put at risk that day and the lives of his family. You're saying to everyone, I need to stay in the good graces of Donald Trump, even though he did this that day to several people. And I'm willing to put this because I want to stay in office, and that's what matters more to me. And right now, Trumpism is the base of the Republican Party.
Huh. I thought blood was thicker than water, but I guess that's just me. You're the director of the Republican Accountability Project. You said you're going to. How will your organization be holding Republicans who voted against this commission accountable?
Yeah, I think that it'll be important to educate. people again as midterms approach on who the people were that obstructed it, who voted against it. And we'll remind them about who the main enablers were that led to January 6th, because part of all of these people were part of this entire process of what led to the big lie and what was said to the voters. And that's leading to the disinformation that continues today across our country. There's a whole group of people out there who believe the election was stolen, even though the courts and DHS and everyone has said, no, this is factually not true. Courts have ruled against us. And you've got the sham going on in Arizona that continues. And so I think it'll be important to be there to say, no, this happened, and remind people and educate them.
So I wonder, the very last part of Corey Cochran's report coming into you, she talked about how Donald Trump is allowed to continue fundraising, and the money that he garners fundraising, he can use any old which way he wants to for any kind of legal defense that he might have. What do you make of that?
Well, it's pretty astonishing to hear that. But I have no doubt that the Trump enterprise is well aware of that, and they have been fundraising. I mean, ultimately, these people are a bunch of grifters who will fundraise off of anything and everything in their favor, regardless of the cost of the voters and regardless of their supporters, right? But none of these people matter to them. It's really about what helps them in the end. And so I'm not surprised to hear that it can be used that way. I'm sure that was part of the calculus of what they're doing. And look, I hope that when it comes down to election time, I won't blame the Democrats for using this in their messaging, and people should use this in the primaries to remind people of what really happened here and how the American people have been fundamentally used by Donald Trump and those around him.
Yeah, in a pursuit of money and power. That's it. Okay, Olivia Troy, thank you. Always good to see you, my friend. You've heard about the Arizona vote recount, so guess what's about to happen in Georgia? We're going to tell you next. New today, Georgia is buckling up for another election recount. It echoes what's happening in Arizona. A state judge in Georgia has ordered Fulton County to allow a group suing over claims of counterfeit ballots to inspect 147,000 ballots. The ruling comes as Republicans grow frustrated with the ongoing recount there, and the Democratic Secretary of State raises questions about the integrity of voting machines for future elections. Joining me now, Rochelle Ritchie, former press secretary for the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Rochelle, welcome. It's good to see you. So how many recounts have we seen in Georgia now? And even with the Republican state legislators, they're saying that there was no evidence of fraud. Why would a judge grant access to these ballots?
I don't know. I think that this judge has made a horrible mistake, and I think it's a slap in the face to those in Georgia who went out and voted during the presidential election. The fact of the matter is that the taxpayers in Georgia are the ones that are paying for all of these recounts. It's not going to fall on the back of Donald Trump or any other Republican that is calling for this. They're paying for it. And so I think it's extremely unfortunate that we're still in this place. We still have a bunch of sore losers in the Republican Party that cannot just let it go. I mean, and I'm not surprised, honestly, Alex, when you think about what happened with Stacey Abrams during the gubernatorial race against Brian Kemp, where she was asking for that there were thousands of votes that he did not allow to be counted during that race, and then he declared victory. And at that time, he was the Secretary of State who oversees the vote. So you have the person that is over the vote, watching the votes come in, saying, okay, we're not going to count these, and then declare himself a winner. So it's exactly. Yeah. So can you make sense of what's happening in Arizona? Because it seems like both sides of the political aisle are agreeing that this recount in Maricopa County was a bad idea. I definitely think it was a bad idea. And then I watched an interview with Arizona State Representative Jasmine Blackwater Nygren, where she really talked about how the Navajo Nation is being very impacted by some of the bills that are coming through Arizona. Basically, looking at the fact that a lot of people on reservations live very, very far from voting polls, the language barriers, the fact that they're not going to allow people to use their tribal identification to vote. All of those sort of things now in this bill are a part of voter suppression. And it's unfortunate because this is all reactionary to Donald Trump. And I feel that that the Republicans in particular have failed to realize that the reason that people were doing mail-in ballots and it was a little different for this presidential election than any other year was because of the pandemic that former President Trump knew about and he ignored.
Yeah, you have a point there. Democrats are pushing to expand voting rights. You have Senator Joe Manchin teaming up right now with Lisa Murkowski to push for reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. And they appear to favor the John Lewis Act that passed in the House. But then some House Democrats would prefer stronger legislation, some favoring the For the People Act or H.R. 1. Can you distinguish the differences there and which one stands a better chance of passing?
Look, I think at this point, we're in a position where beggars can't necessarily be choosers. And I think that we need to do what is going to put us on the path to ensuring that every American in this country is able to vote. And there is nothing more nonpartisan than voting rights in this country. And so if we cannot get on the same accord within our own party, how are we going to convince Republicans to join us in this fight? So at some point, there can't be this infighting and who has the best idea and who's going to be the one to get all of the praise. At some point, you have to come together and you have to move something forward. Because let's think about this, Alex. We have the congressional redistricting coming. We know that Black American voters are the most negatively impacted when it comes to redistricting. And so we need to get on the same accord and we need to do it expeditiously.
But here's the deal. The longer this debate continues, the more time states have to pass new voter suppression legislation. Exactly. What's the most troubling development that you're seeing on that front?
The most troubling development is that Democrats sometimes move way too slow. You know, voter suppression is not anything that is new. This is not a new phenomenon. People have been complaining about voter suppression for more than 50, 60, 70 years in this country. And so Democrats are moving very slow. And now it doesn't even seem genuine to me, honestly, because now that we know that Democrats could possibly lose some seats in Congress, now there's this push to, we got to do this, we got to do that, because they're trying to hold on to their seats instead of doing this for the American people. And if they were focused more on the American people, then they would have been focused on it many, many years ago as more voting rights activists complained about this issue.
Okay. Michelle Ritchie, thank you so much. It's a very good chat we've just had. I appreciate you. So we know that dogs can sniff for bombs and for drugs, but for COVID, how those nice noses are being used at a festival in Miami Beach, coming your way next. Well, there is good news today in the coronavirus pandemic here in the U.S. The daily average for new COVID cases fell below 30,000 this week for the first time in almost a year. This, according to Johns Hopkins University. In as many as 40 states, the rate of new infections is down at least 5% over just this last week. Coronavirus deaths are also at the lowest level since this time last year. A sign of normalcy today, the return of the popular South Beach Wine and Food Festival in Florida. But to protect the crowds from COVID, officials are using dogs to search for the virus. Let's go back to Miami Beach and NBC's Ellison Barber, who's joining us. I'd love to see another demonstration with that wonderful dog, but that's okay if you don't have it this time. That dog was great last time.
We have got it for you. So I'm starting here because this is kind of the first area, the first checkpoint, if you will, for people to come to when they arrive at the festival. But before they get to this point through these gates, the first thing that happens is they are greeted by one of 4 COVID-19 detecting canines, one of them Cobra. And if you look around here just behind you, if we turn around, we almost bumped into a dog here. This is Cobra. She is one of, again, 4 COVID-19 detecting canines working at the festival. Her trainer, John Mills, here is going to show us how this works. So basically what they do, these are people waiting to go to the event. They are aware that COVID-19 sniffing dogs are here and that they are only looking for the scent of COVID-19. You can see as Cobra walks here, she sniffs often around people's hands, people's feet, particularly because they say the smell, the scent of COVID-19 can be fairly easily picked up by dogs through the sweat that people naturally have on their hands and feet. And if she smells any sort of scent of COVID-19, detects any volatiles, she'll just sit down. And if that happens, they would then take the person out of this line to a nearby tent where they can get a rapid COVID-19 test and see whether or not they could return to the festival or if they do, in fact, have COVID-19. This is one of a few safety measures the festival has put in place this year to have it come back and welcome some 25,000 people over the course of 4 days. Listen here.
We have these dogs, but you'll take out your app tonight, you'll take out your smartphone, you will download a SIM check, you'll have to attest that you've either been vaccinated or that you are tested negative to in the last 72 hours. You'll be wristbanded. There'll be random temperature checks. There'll be random rapid testing on site. And some of the biggest changes, you're looking at this huge 3-block area. People used to go from here to there and they'd be all over. Now it's like a supermarket. You're following that way, you're going down that way.
So you can see Cobra's kind of still finished making her way through the other side of this same line. The amazing thing about this, Alex, we talked about this earlier, is that what research has shown us so far, and a lot of it is preliminary and still waiting for some peer reviews, but it's that not only does COVID-19 actually have a scent that dogs can detect, but they're also really good at picking it up. Florida International University, they've been studying this at their Forensic Research Institute for the last year, and they say that their dogs are accurate upwards of 95% of the time, and they're not the only ones who are looking at this. University of Pennsylvania has been studying this, and they say they found the same thing, upwards of 90% accuracy with dogs detecting the scent of COVID-19. They've even studied this as far as Beirut, Lebanon, St. Joseph University, and what people are telling us is they feel like this really could be a non-invasive safety net as people are returning to big events like this one and just having to trust each other that they're actually vaccinated. If we don't totally know for sure, a dog like Cobra can step in and make us feel a little more comfortable. Alex?
Please give John, as I thank you, a high five for doing this demonstration twice with us. And also that I'm the lady he would have to say, no, you can't get down and hug the dog. I'd be that person for sure. Anyway, Allison Barber, thank you so much. It's hard, yeah. Democrats pleading for more money for security, how it's all tied to January 6th. It's next.